It all started with frustration. By late 1944, American troops in Europe were watching columns of German armor keep crawling back onto the battlefield faster than they could be destroyed. Tank after tank, Panthers, Tigers, seemed endless. Air cover helped, sure, but bad weather, clogged runways, and overworked fighter bombers left ground units stranded. Somewhere on a rain-soaked airstrip in France, a group of U.S. Army Air Force's engineers stared at a parked C-47 cargo plane, and someone half-jokingly muttered, "What if we just put guns on that thing?" No one laughed. That single offhand comment kicked off one of the wildest improvisations of World War II, an attempt to turn an unarmed, lumbering transport into a tank killer overnight. It wasn't about following protocol anymore, it was about desperation and creativity colliding at midnight. The C-47 Skytrain was the unglamorous workhorse of the war. It hauled paratroopers into Normandy, dropped supplies over Bastogne, and carried the wounded out of hell. But it wasn't built to fight. It had thin aluminum skin, no armor plating, and engines meant for endurance, not dogfights. And yet, as the Allies pushed deeper into Europe, engineers realized they didn't have the luxury of waiting for new aircraft to arrive from factories back home. They had to work with what was already sitting on the tarmac. Reports from the front described Allied infantry pinned by tanks in foggy villages. Close air support fighters like the P-47s and Typhoons couldn't get there in time. Ground crews began asking, what if our cargo planes could fill the gap? They already had range, payload space, and sturdy frames. With the right firepower, maybe these flying trucks could rain destruction just long enough to tilt a battle. So one freezing evening in December 1944, engineers at a forward air depot began stripping a C-47 to its bones. They ripped out extra seats, welded on reinforced plates, and scavenged spare 75mm M4 cannons, the same kind used on Sherman tanks. Some versions even tried installing underwing rocket tubes borrowed from P-38 Lightnings. It was chaotic, unsanctioned, and borderline insane. But wartime innovation rarely asks permission. Rumors spread across airfields that the boys in the hangar were building a monster. Pilots laughed at first until they saw the black-painted C-47 roll out with a gaping cannon muzzle poking through the nose cone. Someone called it the Dragon Wagon. Another pilot nicknamed it Sky Reaper. The first test shots shook the entire airfield. The recoil nearly tore the nose apart. Mechanics scrambled to reinforce the structure with steel beams scavenged from wrecked jeeps. They recalibrated the flight trim, adjusted engine torque, and retested. Finally, the aircraft fired again, successfully. A transport plane had just become a flying artillery piece, and that's where the madness really began. Commanders, skeptical yet intrigued, gave the order. One sortie. If it works, we'll see. The engineers barely slept that night, hammering and rewiring until dawn. They knew this mission could either be a miracle or a funeral. By sunrise, the world was about to witness something nobody had ever seen before. A cargo plane turned into a tank buster. Cargo planes were never meant to fight wars. They were meant to feed them. The C-47 Skytrain, or Dakota, as the British called it, was designed in the late 1930s for one simple purpose: to carry people and things safely from one place to another. It didn't have gun mounts, it didn't have armor. It was basically an airborne truck with wings. And yet, by the winter of 1944, that very truck was being asked to do the work of a tank destroyer. To understand how insane that sounds, you have to compare the C-47 to the planes that were built for war. Take the A-20 Havoc or the P-47 Thunderbolt, sleek, muscular machines armed to the teeth. The A-20 carried bombs under its belly with machine guns in the nose and turrets to protect its tail. The P-47, on the other hand, was the heavyweight boxer of the skies, a single-engine brute that could dive, strafe, and climb out before enemy flak even found its range. Now picture a C-47 beside them, twin engines, massive wingspan, painted olive drab, unarmored belly, slow as a school bus. Top speed? Just under 230 miles per hour, half that of a fighter. If a Messerschmitt Bf-109 or FW-190 got within a few miles, it was target practice. But the Americans had more of them than anything else, and that made engineers think, why not repurpose abundance? The idea wasn't entirely without precedent. Earlier in the war, the British experimented with improvised bombers, converting transport aircraft into emergency strike planes during North Africa's lean months. And in the Pacific, U.S. pilots had already tested strapping rockets to slow-moving planes to hit Japanese supply barges. The difference here was scale. The European front needed something that could punch through tank armor, not just strafe trucks. So engineers studied the C-47's anatomy like doctors preparing for a risky surgery. The plane's frame could handle extra weight, but only barely. Every addition had to be balanced. A cannon here meant removing fuel tanks there. They carved holes through the nose to fit the cannon and then rewired the cockpit so that the co-pilot could act as the gunner. It was improvisation in its rawest form. Inside the hangar, you could feel the tension between pilots and mechanics. The pilots had flown these birds through flak storms over Arnhem and Normandy. They knew how fragile they were. "You're turning my taxi into a fighter," one of them joked, half nervous, half proud. The engineers grinned back, only if it survives takeoff. What made the C-47 such a tempting platform wasn't just its availability, it was its stability. A steady flight path meant more accurate gunnery, especially when firing heavy rounds like the 75mm M4 shell. And while the cargo plane lacked armor, it could carry more ammunition than any fighter-bomber in the theater. By January 1945, blueprints for the conversion started circulating informally through air depots in France and Belgium. The orders weren't official, they were whispers, suggestions. A colonel would drop by a hangar and casually say, "If you boys can make it work, I'll sign the papers later." It was wartime bureaucracy at its finest. Don't ask, just do. The irony is, these flying tank killers weren't born from the top brass. They were born from grease-stained hands in cold hangars, where young mechanics believed that, with enough rivets and courage, even a cargo plane could hunt tigers. They were right. That night, the workshop didn't sleep. A dozen men worked under bare bulbs and floodlights, tools clanging, wrenches echoing off corrugated walls. They had just one order from their commanding officer. If it flies and it shoots, it's good enough. No manual, no schematics, just guts and urgency. The base commander had allocated a single C-47 for the experiment. It was an older airframe that had already hauled paratroopers across Normandy and medical supplies into Bastogne. Now it sat stripped bare, floor plates removed, cargo doors unbolted, seats stacked in a heap nearby. The engineers measured out every possible inch of internal space. They needed room for a 75mm M4 cannon, an artillery piece usually found inside Sherman tanks. The first challenge was recoil. Firing that cannon in midair could rip the entire plane apart. The engineers had to reinforce the front fuselage with scavenged armor plates, welding them together with such precision that one wrong spark could burn through the aluminum skin. The cannon itself had to be mounted low and centered, perfectly aligned with the aircraft's center of gravity. They cannibalized parts from wrecked B-25 Mitchells and bolted in modified recoil dampers. The second issue, ammunition. Each shell weighed over 15 pounds. Storing dozens of them meant rearranging the cabin into an ammo rack and connecting a mechanical feeding system. Someone joked that they were building a flying Sherman tank with wings. Another said, "If this thing fires more than once without falling apart, I'll buy everyone beer for life." As the mechanics worked, pilots came and went, watching skeptically. Lieutenant Jack Ellison, a C-47 pilot from the 439th Troop Carrier Group, later recalled seeing the cannon for the first time and saying, "You sure it's not going to shoot me out of the sky?" The engineers just smiled. "Only if you pull the trigger too hard." Then came the electrical nightmare. The cannon's firing circuit had to be rerouted through cockpit switches never designed for that kind of load. They jury-rigged a trigger mechanism to the co-pilot's control column using spare radio cables and aircraft batteries. To test it, they loaded a single dummy round. The first pull caused sparks. The second worked. By dawn, the hangar smelled like oil and ozone. The men stood back, staring at what they'd made. The sleek nose of the C-47 was now a blunt, armored snout with a gaping cannon barrel sticking out like a shark's jaw. The side doors were fitted with crude mounts for .50 caliber Brownings. Under each wing, they attached stubby rails, rocket tubes from a wrecked P-38 Lightning. No one could believe it had all been done in less than 12 hours. When the base commander arrived for inspection, he just stared for a long moment and said, "You actually did it." He ordered a test flight immediately. No ceremony, no cameras, just raw proof. The plane rumbled down the airstrip, engines roaring louder than usual from the added weight. As it lifted off, one mechanic muttered, "Godspeed, you mad bastard." Minutes later, the gunship was airborne. At 2,000 feet, the test crew loaded a live shell. The pilot leveled out, aimed at a wrecked truck used for target practice, and called out, "Firing one!" The cannon kicked. The nose jolted violently, but the plane held. Seconds later, the truck below vanished in a flash of orange and dust. The men on the ground erupted into cheers. The impossible had just flown and fired. By evening, telegrams were flying across command posts. Prototype successful, potential use for close air support. Nobody knew it yet, but that one reckless overnight experiment had just planted the seed for an entirely new kind of aircraft, the airborne gunship. The monster had a name now. Soldiers around the base started calling it the Cannon Express, though the pilots preferred something more fitting, Sky Reaper. It wasn't officially on any roster, but everyone knew what it was. The first cargo plane turned into a flying tank killer. What emerged from that sleepless night wasn't elegant, but it was terrifying. The engineers had taken inspiration from an earlier American experiment, the B-25H Mitchell. That version of the famous twin-engine bomber had been equipped with a 75mm M4 cannon in its nose, the same type used by Sherman tanks. Those gunship Mitchells had already proven that such power could be unleashed from the air. They were used effectively in the Pacific, ripping apart Japanese shipping and ground targets. But using that same idea on a transport plane like the C-47 was a leap into the unknown. The first functional prototype used a slightly shortened M4 cannon to reduce recoil stress. Firing it was a two-man operation. The pilot lined up the target, and the co-pilot handled the trigger and reload. The shells had to be loaded manually, one at a time, 15-pound slugs sliding through a cramped nose compartment where oxygen lines once ran. Every shot shook the entire fuselage, rattling tools and loose panels. Under its wings, the engineers mounted clusters of M8 rocket tubes, 8 on each side. The idea was simple: fire the cannon for big targets, unleash the rockets for tank columns. Combined, the aircraft could carry nearly 1,000 pounds of ordnance. It was slow, yes, but it hit like a thunderclap. Its first demonstration mission came in early January 1945, somewhere over the Ardennes. A small German armored group had been spotted moving through a snow-covered road near Houffalize. The fog made it impossible for fast-moving fighters to strike, but the converted C-47 could loiter low and slow. The Sky Reaper lumbered over the trees, invisible in the haze until the first cannon shot echoed across the valley. It struck a half-track, blowing it apart in seconds. The co-pilot reloaded frantically as the pilot adjusted course, lining up another target. Then came the second shot. Another explosion, another direct hit. On the ground, German soldiers scattered, trying to find cover from a plane they didn't even recognize. What made this aircraft so unique wasn't just its firepower, it was its persistence. Fighters had to dive in and peel out quickly to avoid anti-air fire. But this gunship could orbit for nearly 2 hours, circling targets, picking them off one by one. Its slow speed became its advantage. Reports from that mission spread fast. "Cargo plane kills tanks" was how one radio operator summed it up. Commanders were skeptical until reconnaissance confirmed destroyed vehicles exactly where the gunship claimed them. Suddenly, everyone wanted a Sky Reaper, or at least something like it. By February, a few more C-47s were pulled into the same kind of experimental modification. Some received dual 37mm autocannons instead of a single 75mm. Others added twin 50-caliber side guns for suppressive fire. One crew even tried a downward-firing mount to attack tanks from above, mimicking a Stuka dive bomber's deadly precision. It was far from perfect. The recoil continued to damage the front fuselage, forcing frequent repairs. The aiming system was crude, just a grease pencil line on the cockpit glass. But despite the flaws, it worked. Each successful mission built confidence. What began as an act of desperation turned into a tactical breakthrough. Engineers now realized they weren't just patching a hole in air support, they were rewriting the rulebook on how aircraft could dominate ground warfare. And as those improvised gunships rolled back into base, their fuselages scarred and smoking, the men who built them finally understood they had turned a cargo hauler into something entirely new, a symbol of American ingenuity under fire. The true test came when theory met chaos, combat under pressure, not controlled tests on empty fields. By March 1945, the Allies were pushing deep into Germany, and armored resistance was everywhere. The Sky Reaper was assigned to escort a convoy advancing near the Rhine, its job to suppress enemy armor waiting in ambush. Nobody knew if it would return. The morning of the mission, frost still coated the wings. The crew, 4 men in total, checked the mounts, counted shells, and prayed the airframe would hold. The pilot, Captain Howard "Red" Morgan, had flown dozens of supply missions before, but this would be his first as a gunship commander. As the engines roared to life, he looked at his co-pilot, grinned, and said, "Let's see if she bites." The C-47 lifted off sluggishly, its extra armor and ammunition making it feel heavy, reluctant. The ground disappeared below in a patchwork of white fields and blackened forests. Ahead lay the target, a German column retreating through a small village outside Remagen, the same village that had resisted 2 days of artillery fire. The crew could already see smoke rising when they arrived. "Coming in low," Morgan said, pulling the throttles back. The plane shuddered in the wind as they dropped to 500 feet. The co-pilot leaned into the cannon sight, really just a bolted piece of glass with a grease mark, and lined up the shot. "Target locked," he muttered. Boom. The recoil hit like a hammer. The cockpit shook, gauges flickering. Down below, a Panzer IV erupted into flames. The co-pilot laughed in disbelief. "Direct hit," he shouted. The pilot banked left, circling again as flak burst around them. They loaded another shell, 13 seconds to push it in, lock it, and fire again. Boom. Another strike, this time on a half-track convoy. Smoke blanketed the road. The Germans were firing back now, their 20mm guns flashing from the tree line. The C-47's right wing took a hit, tearing a fist-sized hole through the aluminum, but the engines held. The pilot kept his line steady, rolling the plane into a wide orbit while the side gunners opened up with their 50 cals. The sound was deafening, cannon fire from the nose, machine guns blazing from the doors. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes, but when it was over, the road was littered with wreckage. Tanks, trucks, and armored cars lay burning in the snow. The gunship, battered and trembling, limped back toward friendly lines. One engine was leaking oil, one of the rocket racks had been blown off, but they made it. When they landed, mechanics swarmed the aircraft, eyes wide. The nose cone was blackened from smoke, the wings pocked with holes, but the cannon was still intact. Captain Morgan climbed down, wiped soot off his face, and simply said, "She works." Word spread fast. Commanders who had dismissed the project as reckless now demanded reports. Could this modification be replicated? Could it be scaled? The official documentation was still sketchy. Many of these missions were technically unauthorized improvisations, but after the Rhine operation, even high command couldn't ignore it. That same week, engineers in England and Italy began experimenting with similar setups on other airframes. A few used B-25s, others tried older cargo variants. It wasn't mass production, but it was proof that necessity breeds invention, and sometimes invention works. For the crews who flew those missions, the experience was unforgettable. The co-pilot of Morgan's flight, Lieutenant James "Buddy" Cole, later said, "It wasn't pretty, but when that cannon fired, you felt like the whole world paused to watch." The Sky Reaper had passed its trial by fire, and in doing so, it had changed the way the U.S. Air Force thought about air support forever. The success of those improvised gunships rippled through the air forces faster than any official memo could. By the time American troops were crossing the Rhine in March 1945, engineers and pilots across Europe were copying the idea in small, localized versions. No two looked the same. Each one was a Frankenstein of scavenged weapons, spare mounts, and field ingenuity. But the concept was identical: turn slow planes into heavy hitters. The results shocked even the generals. These modified cargo planes, though never built for combat, proved that low-speed stability could outperform raw speed in close air support. While fighters had to zoom past at nearly 400 miles per hour, these improvised gunships could hover over a battlefield like vultures, striking with terrifying precision. Infantry units on the ground began calling for them directly over radio, requesting the truck with wings. What started as a field experiment soon became a doctrine in the making. War planners began studying the feasibility of dedicated gunships. By late April 1945, some strategic reports out of the European theater mentioned the cannon transport conversion, noting its efficiency against both soft targets and armored vehicles in poor weather. But the war was ending fast, and mass production never followed. The idea would have to wait for the next conflict, yet the seed had been planted. When the Korean War erupted 5 years later, the Air Force remembered those scrappy improvisations. And by the time Vietnam escalated in the 1960s, the concept returned with vengeance, this time official, refined, and deadly. Enter the AC-47, spooky. It looked familiar. The same C-47 airframe, now reinforced, armored, and bristling with 3 side-mounted 7.62mm miniguns capable of spewing 6,000 rounds per minute. Instead of tank-busting cannon shells, it used a flood of tracers, an aerial firestorm that lit up the jungle at night. American troops called it Puff the Magic Dragon. The DNA traced straight back to those improvised 1944 conversions, the same belief that a cargo plane could be more than a hauler. The Air Force then refined the concept again with the AC-119 and eventually the AC-130 Spectre. The Spectre became the ultimate evolution of that wartime idea, a flying fortress capable of loitering for hours, using side-mounted howitzers and autocannons guided by computerized fire control. Each step, from the C-47's one-night modification to the multi-million-dollar AC-130, was built on the same foundation: slow, steady, brutally precise firepower. And none of it would have happened without a few exhausted engineers welding cannons onto a transport plane in a muddy hangar in France. Historians later found scattered field reports describing those early tank killer conversions. Most were handwritten logs or maintenance notes, barely preserved. One memo from February 1945 read simply, Converted transport used in ground assault role. Cannon effective. Recommend further testing. That dry bureaucratic line might be the quiet birth certificate of the modern gunship. What makes the story even more remarkable is how informal it all was. There was no Project Sky Reaper in the archives, no classified operation. It wasn't even sanctioned by the War Department. These were men who saw a problem, lack of close air support, and solved it with what they had on hand. It's the kind of improvisation that only happens when rules bend under pressure. From there, military aviation changed forever. The lesson stuck. Speed isn't everything. Sometimes the slow, steady, reliable platform, if armed right, can dominate the battlefield in ways no sleek fighter can. That's why, decades later, when the AC-130s flew over Afghanistan and Iraq, many airmen quietly nicknamed them Sky Reapers too, an echo of that muddy French hangar where it all began. When the war ended in May 1945, the improvised Sky Reaper gunships were quietly scrapped, melted back down into spare aluminum for post-war transport fleets. No parade, no medals, just quiet disappearance into history. Yet the men who built and flew them remembered every second, the sparks, the fear, the impossible recoil that somehow didn't tear their plane apart. Most of those engineers and pilots were ordinary servicemen, mechanics barely in their 20s, pilots used to flying paratroopers or supplies. They weren't weapons designers, they weren't following blueprints. They were problem solvers armed with nothing more than wrenches, intuition, and too much adrenaline. In their logbooks, the story barely takes up a paragraph, but in reality, it changed air warfare forever. A few years later, when the Air Force began developing dedicated attack aircraft, some of those same engineers were quietly consulted. They never bragged about it, but their fingerprints were on everything that came after, from the early gunship experiments to the tactical concepts of persistent airborne fire support. The idea that a plane could linger over the battlefield, not just fly past, that came from these forgotten nights. One of the original crew chiefs, Sergeant Bill Porter, later told a journalist in the 1960s, "We weren't trying to invent history. We were just trying to keep our boys alive another day." His statement captured the essence of wartime innovation, not glory, but survival. And it wasn't just about hardware. The Sky Reaper story proved that innovation doesn't always come from headquarters or laboratories. It often begins in a cold hangar with a few sleepless men staring at an impossible problem. They didn't have months. They didn't have factories. They had a deadline, dawn. And by dawn, they had a working gunship. Decades later, when the AC-130 Spectre gunship became one of the most feared aircraft in the world, orbiting silently over jungles and deserts, raining precision fire on enemy positions, the old veterans who'd worked on that first cargo conversion must have felt something familiar. They'd seen this before, in the smoke and sparks of 1944. Today, in museums across the U.S., you can find gleaming C-47s painted in D-Day stripes, celebrated for their role in airborne operations. But none display the scars of those few wild experiments. No cannon-mounted nose, no scorched fuselage. The Air Force never officially recorded them as a model. Their story survived mostly through the words of the men who were there, whispered in reunion halls and veterans' interviews. Yet their legacy is undeniable. They took a slow, harmless cargo plane and made it spit fire. They blurred the line between transport and war machine, between fear and brilliance. Their courage didn't just fill a gap in a desperate battle. It wrote the first chapter in a new kind of aerial warfare. The next time you see a modern gunship circling silently above a conflict zone, remember, it all began with a handful of grease-stained hands, a scavenged Sherman cannon, and an idea too crazy to ignore. Because sometimes the future of war isn't born in laboratories. It's born overnight, in a freezing hangar, under the sound of hammering steel when someone looks at an old cargo plane and says, "Why not?"